Imagine for a moment that everything you've been chasing for years, success, recognition, carefully constructed goals, is silently crumbling. You have no more momentum, no more desire, no more fuel. And yet, you're not sick, you're not broken. You're going through a stage that almost no one talks about. That moment, after spiritual awakening, when motivation disappears. We often believe that discovering inner truth will light a bigger fire. But in reality, for many, it's the opposite. It's calm, a loss of bearings, a void. Why does this lack of momentum occur precisely when we're getting closer to the truth? And above all, what does it want to teach us? In this video, we'll reveal the keys that Carl Jung understood long ago to transform this confusing phase into one of the greatest opportunities for inner growth. Imagine for a moment that you finally arrive at what you've been searching for years. An inner truth, an opening of consciousness, that moment when everything seems clear. Illusions fall, pretenses dissipate, and you feel a new freedom. But after this clarity, something strange happens. The energy that once drove you fades. The goals that seemed important to you no longer have any flavor. Your old ambitions, the ones that guided your steps, suddenly seem empty. You wake up one morning without momentum, unable to rediscover the fire that once compelled you to move forward. This paradox is puzzling. We've been told repeatedly that spiritual awakening should fill us with enthusiasm, that discovering the truth will unleash our power. Yet, for many, the opposite is true. After awakening, a kind of inner silence sets in, and with it, a loss of the will to act. This isn't laziness or failure. It's as if the soul, tired of illusions, has voluntarily withdrawn the fuel from the ego. Carl Jung already understood. Awakening is not an arrival, but a psychological death. It is the end of a cycle where the ego dominated and the beginning of another, still unknown. When you see the illusions, when the mask falls, the old landmarks disappear with it. The outside world continues to turn, but you feel a standstill. And this gap creates a feeling of emptiness that can be frightening. In reality, what's crumbling are the artificial structures that once gave your life meaning. Careers, status, projects fashioned to please others. These things looked solid, but they were built on a character, not your true self. When that character fades, the old engine stops with it. Many people confuse this stage with depression. However, it's not an illness. It's a transformation. Your energy isn't disappearing. It's being reorganized. This silence you're experiencing is a signal, a pause imposed by your own mind to force you to redefine your way of living. And if you take the time to listen to it, you'll see that it's a founding moment, a gateway to something much greater than the old momentum that carried you. Modern society has conditioned our minds to believe that any pause is a weakness. We glorify productivity, speed, and constant action. So, when silence comes after a spiritual awakening, many judge themselves harshly. I'm not moving forward. I'm stuck. I'm wasting my time. In truth, this judgment is the real obstacle, because what you're going through isn't stagnation, but a fundamental stage that Jung already described, enantiodromia. It's the natural movement where everything shifts toward its opposite. After living in the always doing mode comes the experience of doing nothing. It's not a mistake, it's a rebalancing. In many ancient traditions, this phase is represented by the passage of the cocoon. The caterpillar ceases all activity, dissolves, and becomes formless. From the outside, it appears inert, motionless, almost dead. But inside, everything is reorganizing. Everything is preparing for a transformation that is beyond understanding. Human beings experience a similar process after awakening. The abrupt cessation of the old engine is in reality a sign that another system of life is being constructed. The problem is that our ego, accustomed to control, panics in this space. It demands objectives, it wants to find its bearings, it seeks a clear direction. But the soul does not respond to these injunctions. It does not hurry, it imposes a time of silence. And this silence, far from being a loss, is an initiatory passage. It is the place where false foundations crumble to make way for something more authentic. The outside world calls this laziness, but in reality, it's an invisible discipline. You're invited to endure the absence of reference points without running away, to accept stillness as an active part of the process. The more you resist, the more unbearable this emptiness seems. But as soon as you stop judging this moment, a new understanding can emerge. Life is forcing you to detach yourself from an exhausted way of functioning, to open the way to another way of existing. This silence is sacred. It is not a void, it is a gestation. Those who accept it discover that what they believe to be a loss is in reality the sign of an inner rebirth in progress. Many people fall into a dangerous trap after awakening, believing that nothing matters anymore. They say, everything is an illusion, nothing has meaning, and they cut themselves off from the world. In reality, this is not wisdom. It is an escape. Jung explained it well. The ego is not there to disappear. It is not an enemy to be killed. It is there to be integrated. Rejecting the ego is rejecting a part of yourself, and this is what leads to spiritual drift. Detachment is not disengagement. Refusing to act, isolating yourself by thinking you are above it all, is not a sign of awakening. It is a dead end. True awakening does not invite you to abandon life, but to live it differently. It is no longer about running to be recognized, but about contributing without a mask, with aligned energy. If you refuse this role, you risk floating indefinitely, without roots, without anchorage, trapped in an abstract spirituality. Ask yourself this question: are you truly refusing to act, or are you afraid to redefine your action without the old fuel of ego? Because that is the real challenge. You can no longer play the same game as before, because you have seen that it is rigged. But you also cannot leave the field of life. The world needs your presence, but a different, more authentic presence. Awakening doesn't give you a passport to escape responsibilities. It forces you to reinvent them. If you think that's where it ends, you've fallen into the opposite illusion. Because the truth is, you're not here to dissolve into nothingness, but to express what's real within you, even if it's uncomfortable. The emptiness you feel is not an invitation to abandon everything, but a test. Life is waiting to see if you are ready to act without a mask, without a false role, without depending on applause. This is where the difference lies between those who stray into inaction and those who are deeply reborn. There comes a point in this journey when you have no escape. Things you've always pushed aside resurface. The wounds of your past, the parts of yourself you wanted to forget, the emotions you've long hidden beneath your successes or your daily hustle and bustle. Awakening tears back the veil, and suddenly you find yourself face to face with these shadows. It's uncomfortable, sometimes unbearable, but it's necessary. Jung called this shadow integration, welcoming the parts of yourself you'd rejected, not to erase them, but to acknowledge them and give them back their place. If you feel empty, if you can't move forward, it's not because you're broken. It's because your mind is deliberately blocking you so you stop running away. Until you confront what's hidden in your unconscious, it will prevent you from regaining your energy. It's as if your psyche has deliberately cut the engine to force you to open that door. Of course, your first instinct is to resist. You want to regain the old momentum, the clarity of before, that sense of knowing where you're going. But that time is over. Until you look at what you're avoiding, the motivation won't return. This step isn't a punishment. It's a healing process. It protects you from yourself, from your own illusions. Remember, what you feel as loss is actually a metamorphosis. Silence is not empty. It is full of everything you need to welcome before you can move forward. It is not wasted time. It is a sacred time for your being to reorganize itself. You don't need to fight to regain your energy. You need to allow yourself to feel what you have long denied. And this is where many give up, because facing your shadows is harder than chasing goals. But this is also where true transformation begins. When you stop running away, when you sit with your wounds instead of covering them up, you open the door to a motivation of a whole different order. Deeper, more real. Then, without warning, something changes. Not with a great burst, not with an explosion of energy, but with a discreet, almost imperceptible breath. You feel a new force within, different from the one you knew. It doesn't force you to run. It doesn't push you to prove yourself. It simply invites you to move forward, calmly, steadily. It is no longer the ego's motivation, made of anxiety and competition. It is a gentler but more sustainable energy. Jung called this the emergence of essence. You then realize that what you had taken for an end was actually a beginning. Motivation doesn't return in the form you expected. It's reborn, transformed. It's no longer turned outward, but inward. It doesn't seek approval, it seeks truth. What you do now is no longer a race for recognition, but an expression of who you really are. And this expression, however modest, has immense power because it no longer depends on a mask. It is at this moment that you understand the meaning of this painful passage. The silence, the emptiness, the loss of desire were not there to destroy you, but to erase the old fuel so that you could discover another. A purer fuel, rooted not in fear, but in your deepest being. This is the true spiritual engine. Of course, this new motivation is unlike the old ones. It doesn't drag you into excess. It isn't hectic. It moves slowly, but surely. It doesn't seek to impress. It seeks to be fair. And it's this fairness that makes it powerful. Because once you've tasted this energy, there's no turning back. This rebirth isn't a return to the old you, but a step toward a more complete you. You no longer need to play a role, fill in boxes, or follow plans dictated by the outside world. You're finally beginning to act from your essence. And this action, however simple, carries within it a light that others instinctively recognize. This is true transformation, moving from mask to authenticity, from noise to truth, from ego to soul. If you find yourself in this silent journey, know that you are not lost. You are in transformation. The disappearance of motivation is not an end, but a profound reorganization of your being. It is a sacred stage, a necessary passage to rebuild your life on truer, more solid, more aligned foundations. Don't judge it. Don't run away from it. Let yourself be moved. And when the momentum returns, it will be different, calmer, but infinitely more powerful, because it will no longer come from the ego, but from your essence. If you want to continue exploring these truths, to walk together on this path of wisdom and lucidity, subscribe and join this community. Because awakening is not an end. It is the beginning of a life lived with authenticity and depth.